Hello everyone, Nostromus here. It's been a while. I've been working very hard on a new version of Satisfactory Factories Alpha 4. This update brings a ton of stability improvements to the planner, fixes some major bugs within it that would cause soft locks, outright corruption of plan data, and also brings a bunch of new features to the table. Before we begin, feel free to skip ahead to different parts of this video using YouTube's chapter feature. I'm going to go over what changed in Alpha 4, as well as what's to come for Alpha 5. As you can see here from this list, we've changed at least 32 things in Alpha 4. Not everything that was changed is in this list. There's a few minor things that can be bothered to make a GitHub issue for. But if you want to view this list by yourself, feel free to look at the description and I'll put the link in there. Also, if you came from Reddit, the link is in the description there as well. I'm not going to go through every single change that we've done here in this list. I'm going to highlight some of the major things and also some of the minor stuff. Otherwise, let's crack on with showing you what's in Update 4. So some of you may remember in Update 2 we had an export calculator. It wasn't very well made. It was always showing regardless if you wanted to see it or not. So I've improved it now where it's hidden within a tray, and when you open it it'll show a lot more information and hopefully a bit more useful to you guys as well. So to see it, you scroll down to any of the factories, see near exports in your satisfaction section, you press this little button here and this opens the new calculator. So as you can see here, there's 4 different types of vehicles that can be used by the calculator. I do realise there's a 5th, which is belts. Eagle-eyed amongst you may have noticed that belts is missing. It was actually in Update 2. That will come in Update 5. So what we've got here is the ability to control a single variable, which is time. But in reality, there are 4 other variables in terms of transporting goods. So you've got the cargo capacity of the vehicle. So in this case, trains has 32 slots, for example. The stack size of the good. So in this case, concrete is 500 stack size. So you can fit 32 times 500. I'm not going to embarrass myself for trying to do the math. You've got variables you can't control, which is traffic. Well, you can control it to an extent, but traffic, waiting time, and acceleration forces. The latter one being, for example, if a train's stuck on a hill, it takes a long time for its turbines to spin up and then starts rolling forward, whereas if it was on a level, flat level, it would just start moving, stuff like that. And the 4th one is time. And the time being the thing you can control here, which is the round time on average to do 3 stops. And as you can see in this tooltip here, round trip time is calculated by you physically go into the factory, go into the train that's going to do the run, and when it's loaded the thing at this concrete factory, for example, you press start timer. Then you wait for the train to go to the destination stop, and then comes back to the concrete factory. You could ride the train if you wanted to, or you could just wait for the train to come back, go grab a cup of tea, and then stop the timer, for example. But once you stop the timer, and this button will just quite conveniently update the time for you. Say, for example, it took, 250 seconds. In this case, you would only need 1 freight car to service this route. If, for example, we were transporting something possibly more realistic, such as, 10,000 concrete in late game, that's totally a feasible amount. You'll notice, and I did it on the wrong factory, you'll notice that it takes a lot more freight cars. So if we change that back to 200, you notice now it takes 2 freight cars. If we change that back to 1,000, that would only need 1 freight car. So as we update the plan, this will also get updated. It's not supported yet by the GameSync feature, but I might add that in Alpha 5, but effectively, you're able to see at a glance here how much you need of vehicles to service the good. One thing I did not know as I was developing this is that trucks actually is the highest throughput. But because of their inherent inaccuracies with the autopilot feature, which is why I've marked these as OK accuracy, you get some inefficiencies back from that. So, in this case, it's a toss-up between having consistency versus throughput. Some may argue throughput is king. Fine, that's fair enough. And if it takes 250 seconds, you would still need 2 trucks. or if it takes less time because, I don't know, it's not having to do going around things. For example, if it's a direct point to point, it took less time. You'd see that in this. So this allows you to test different methods of transport. The most accurate one being drones. The reason for drones being marked as excellent accuracy here is that drones are not subject to terrain, nor are they subject to external forces such as acceleration and traffic, an exception for waiting time. If your drone part, so you need 2 drone parts here, and this is stated in the assumptions in these tooltips as well. If you have 2 drone parts or a pair, as long as you have roughly 4 drones servicing that amount, it would happily do that, no problem. More realistic, of putting more realistic values, say this takes, I don't know, 1 minute and 45, you would need 4 drones to service this. Obviously, if it takes longer, you need more drones because it takes longer to physically get there, and less drones if it takes less time, obviously. But say, for example, if it takes 1 minute 45, 4 drones would perfectly service this. There may be some waiting time. I don't think the amount of time required would basically cause them to wait, but it may do in certain circumstances. Unfortunately, I just cannot model that in code. So again, take that with a slight pinch of salt. It is listed here that it's fairly accurate because it uses a flight and rail system. All the variables except waiting time and fuel exhaustion. Obviously, if you don't supply your fuel properly to your drones, same with trucks, same with tractors, you are going to have delays, which this planner cannot account for. It also persists the settings as you reload the page or swap to another tab or whatnot. So feel free to enter these and it will stick. So this is like a permanent thing within the thing. So if I reload this and go back to central storage, you'll see it will persist a reload, and also it will synchronize to your account as well if you're logged in, and if you share a link as well, it'll also persist that information as well throughout the whole lot. There's been a massive change on how factories plans are loaded in Alpha 4. So now it does it on a sequential basis, like this, where it loads individually each factory and does calculations in a what's called just-in-time fashion, rather than doing them all at once. And how the user perceived that was just the planner was just lagging a lot. It would take a couple of seconds to just show a change on the view. So what it does now, as I say, it just does a little bit of smoke and mirrors, where it sort of just shows that it's loading, and it does things in the background as would any typical loading experience would be. I think this adds a lot more polish to the planner, and it represents to the user it's actually doing something. Whereas before, what it would do is something similar to this, where it would expand, and this is doing a lot of stuff now, and it would just take a long time. It took about 2 seconds there to just change something. So what we do now is we add a little toast just saying, hey, this is going to take a long time to do. If it's more than 10 factories, it will throw up this warning saying this is going to take a little while, please wait. There's also now, and I think this is an update 3, we've added a banner where it encourages you to sort of hide the factories. So if you press hide all or the button there, it's a lot more performant. You'll see here on my scroll bar, if we just expand all again, watch the scroll bar, it gets very smaller, which means there's a lot of stuff on the page that it's trying to do. The way that the planner works is that if you update any one of these values, it has to do a bunch of checks to understand where to apply that change to, and that's something internal to the framework I use. So it's got to do a lot of work. Now, in doing so, the planner loading experience also throws up this warning, which is detecting a lot of factories, expect significant rendering delay. And as you can see, it's taking a time. There you go. It's taking about 5 seconds or so to render that. I'll show you again for those that might have missed it. Refresh. Oh, it's actually lagging my browser. It's that struggling. There we go. It's thinking about it. There we go. So you can see when there's a lot on there, it struggles. It struggles hard. So hopefully this should show as a bit of a better experience to people. It's not perfect by any means. There's an extra thing we've added where I got the feedback that this banner being here all the time would it's just annoying. So what we do now is we've added the ability to dismiss it, and that will persist throughout the user's sort of time on the site until you refresh the page, then it will come back. So in Alpha 4, we've changed how products are represented to be a lot more flexible, a lot more efficient in how you figure these things out. So two ways we've done that is through ingredients and buildings. So you're now able to change a product based on ingredient amount. So say, for example, you have 250 iron ore available to you at a node. So you can scale this to accommodate for that, which is a largely requested feature. So you can see, obviously, this is a 1-to-1 ratio recipe that you can create 9.33 recurring buildings of that, and there you go. You can also do it by buildings as well. So I like to do my constructors, refineries, etc. in groups of 8 because they ratio quite nicely. So from there, you can just straight up just say, I want 8 smelters, bang, and there you go. You've got the quantities required to make that happen. This also persists through different recipes as well, so obviously the quantity remains a constant. But say, for example, if you change the recipe and say, for example, you've got 6 foundries of that, straight away you can just update it, and it will update all the numbers and just work. There's been a bit of a bug fix with this, how quantities inputted as well. A lot of people are breaking their plans by adding commas, which you cannot now do. It's been fully validated as a number field now, so people have added commas, which would cause the planner to break. I know commas are fairly common in Europe and some other areas of the world. Unfortunately, there's got to be a point where the decimal has to win this, merely because I deal with floats in the planner and we've got to use a number value. So I was considering, do I convert commas into periods? It was just causing too much confusion. So everything's a decimal, everything's a number, and your planner should no longer break. Also in Update 4, the way that we calculate satisfaction for byproducts and products of the same type, so in this case, sulfuric acid, we've fixed how trim and satisfy buttons work. So before, in this scenario, if you pressed satisfy here on this button here, it would try to do it to satisfy the overall factory without considering that there's a byproduct. So what it does now is that it takes every source of sulfuric acid, doesn't matter if it comes from an import, doesn't matter if it comes from a byproduct or a product itself, it does not care now, and corrects whatever you click to fix it. So in this case, we can't fix or click that button there to satisfy by sulfuric acid. The planner doesn't do that, and I'll explain why in a minute. But what we can now do is that if we've got a shortage of sulfuric acid, in this case we're 200 short, if we had it as a product, we can immediately satisfy it. So that now changes to 300. The reason why we can't do that on the byproduct is because if there's multiple sources of the product, such as sulfuric acid, generated through byproducts, we don't know which one to update. And also it has the side effect of imbalancing the whole factory. So what we've chosen to do in this case, and I'll just show you that case again, is that now the sulfuric acid shows a correct manually prompt. What this means is that because the item's used in the byproduct, the planner doesn't know which one to scale properly. So in this case, there's actually 2 options. You've got either fix with the product or fix it through the byproduct. Now, because it's a byproduct, you could argue, yes, there's only one source of a byproduct. But because we're going to scale a byproduct, we're scaling the product as well. So if we scaled this to, say, to 103, obviously you're generating more in-case uranium cells. That might be undesirable, and it might cause a lot of more calculations or math that you've got to do to like balance it. So I've opted to prompt you to fix it yourself rather than trying to take assumptions and fix it for you in an undesirable way. I could fix it in a certain way, but someone might not want it that way. It just caused a lot of confusion in discussions we had internally, so I decided just to make you guys fix it instead. So the import section in Alpha 4 has had a massive overhaul as well. There was a numerous bunch of bugs of it where it would not take into account different imports of the same product, or the same item, sorry, and it would do weird math if it was in that scenario. So I'm demonstrating it here, where we've got two compacted coals. In the original planner, what would happen in this scenario, because we're producing by 190, is that it would change that one thing. So if I click trim there, it would have changed this to be 800. Change it to be like that. Obviously that's wrong. So if we change that back to 540 and actually click it, you can now see it actually accommodates for the other import here. So it does the math of 450 plus 380, which equals 800, and accounts over imports basically. The inverse also works as well. So if we under import there and we click satisfy, it'll turn it back. Same again on the other side. If, for example, we just can't create more on that import all over a sudden, we click that side and it adjusts it as well. Additionally, if we lower the demand to 600, we now have the ability to show if there's imports that are completely redundant. So the way this works is that it checks for the highest one, which in this case is this one, and marks, and if that satisfies the demand entirely, it signifies all other imports of the same type as redundant. So in effect, this is a slight plan optimization thing, I guess you could call it, where if you've got multiple sources and suddenly you no longer need those multiple sources, you can reduce it to just one. So you can delete them and then trim it. And it's much, much nicer. It produces a much nicer and cleaner plan doing this. In Alpha 4, we've changed and refactored a lot to do with how imports are considering factories as candidates for importing products. So before, it was doing a lot of edge cases around importing raw materials when it shouldn't have done, importing entire products that just wasn't exportable. Various edge cases that were just really confusing and wasn't really well made. So I've completely gutted how imports work and how these drop downs work and redid them, and I've also backed them by unit tests, so they will never break again, hopefully. So what happens now is it also factors in more sources. So for example here, I've built fuel powered generators which obviously need fuel. So I've added the ability to, and I've created a fuel factory just below it to export fuel. It now also detects when fuels are needed for various generators, whereas it didn't do this before. So if we added one for uranium, you'll notice here that we don't have an import for this because no factory in the plan creates uranium fuel rods. So if we create demand, it's not satisfied now. So we have two choices from here. We can either add it as a product or add it as a factory. So let's call this uranium fuel rods and add that in. Fuel rod, there we go. And if we go back to the factory that we have our demand for, we now see that import is now re-highlighted and we can import that straight in. You notice as well, and this didn't work in the previous update, it immediately marks itself as there's no factories for exports available to supply because it scanned the whole plan and there is no more imports available to the factory in that current configuration. So in Alpha 4 there was a few changes to do with validation of this entering this value here. So for example now, just like products, you cannot enter commas anymore. That's just not possible. And any other non-number character you can't enter either. So you can only enter 0.333 of, sorry, 0.001 of a value as well. You can try and add others, but it'll correct you. And effectively force you to put in proper numbers. So this works much better. It used to break people's plans as well if you entered invalid characters, just like products was as well, just like this one at the top. In Alpha 4 as well, satisfaction received quite a lot of love. The first thing I'd like to highlight is what I'm calling part roles. So a part can contain 4 roles within a factory. So it can contain a product. It could be used internally as well if it's an internal product. It could be a byproduct, which can also be used internally as well. Or it could be also imported. I just realised I need to change the colours for these, but it can also be imported as well. It can also be a combination of all 4. So basically at a glance, you can now see how the product interacts with each factory. Whereas before, you would have to derive the information from scrolling up, knowing that this is a product, and then knowing that it's used internally, and then it's also a byproduct, in this case for sulfuric acid. If I add like sulfuric acid directly here, if I can spell today, sulfuric acid, you'd also note that that's also now a product in its own right, and a byproduct, and imported. So sulfuric acid now should actually have all four. It's like a general with that meme where they've got multiple medals in their chest. It's showing all four now. Another major change is how plutonium and uranium waste is now handled in the planner. What would happen before, and this was kind of fixed in update 3, but what would happen before is users would just create uranium waste here as you would with any other item, which you would assume is right, and you would soft lock yourself because you can't then create a recipe for it. It's just physically not possible to make. And other weird conditions like this would happen. This will, by the way, be removed by the time you see this video because this is just a demonstration. But yeah, you would see this fixed product button, which it would do nothing or would do things in the background really weirdly. So what we've got now is the ability to create the generator to create this waste. So, for those that don't know, obviously, uranium waste and plutonium waste can only be created as part of burning fuel rods in nuclear generators. So this button adds that generator, adds it at the exact correct amount, and it also calculates exactly what fuel rods you need to make that happen. Whereas before, you would have to do this math manually, which was not great, and you would have to keep tweaking this up until the point that you actually get it. I do realise as well that this is probably coming update 5, the ability to edit this like you can with all these as well. That's going to come in update 5. I've made a note of this. But yeah, if the production of waste is insufficient, there's also another button called Fix Generator, which quite simply just redoes that calculation. Inversely, if you create more demand for it, again, it adds more in. And it accounts for imports of this as well. So if we go ahead and delete, so if we go ahead and create a demand for uranium waste, and let's call this plutonium, we can now import this as you would with any other product into, you can import uranium waste as any other product from the nuclear factory. In doing so, it's now created a shortage, as you would expect, and this is where the fixed generator thing takes over. So before, this was a really complicated operation to create the import, then figure out again what, like these are clean numbers, right? So you would if this was like 125 or 152 in this case, you would have to then try and figure out exactly how many fuel rods to put in. Is it 1.2? No, not quite. Is it 1.9? No, not quite. Is it 1.25? No, not quite. So this button just does away with all that. It just fixes it. So it's apparently 4.04. That would have taken me a while to get to that point. So it just completely removes all this extra math you've got to do. A common pitfall that people fall into is how to handle byproduct balance. So in this case, this factory here, creating heavy oil residue, has a 49.5%, 49.5 minute shortage. Now, you'll notice here there's a correct manually button here. Let's just read this. This item is a byproduct. Currently, the planner does not know how to scale byproducts correctly, as there could be a number of ways to do it that the user may not want. So what this means is that we've got two items here that are creating heavy oil residue as a byproduct. I don't know which one you would want to increase. And because it's a byproduct, increasing it will create more demand on all the other ingredients. So in this case, it's just crude oil, right? That's dead simple to fix. But if it's like a byproduct like alumina, for example, that creates a lot of extra stuff, you can't really expect the planner to understand or read your mind on which one to change. So in this case, the user has to correct it manually. So if we drop that back to a problem state again, you're prompted to correct it manually effectively. So this is where you would go and say, okay, so it tells you exactly, it tries to help you, it tells you exactly how many you need. So this is like 240, so oh god, rough math here. 240 plus 50 is 290. So yeah, I can do basic math. So there you go. It prompts you to change it yourself effectively. And before update 4, this would not handle very well. It would show a fix product button here, which didn't do anything. It was just completely broken. So at least now you're able to rectify the problem yourself. Another big problem that update 3 introduced was the ability to do all the math on power generators. So when you had multiple power generators like this, where you had 2 of the exact same type, these produce 25 gigawatts each. So the reason why you would want to use multiple groups like this is maybe that you ran out of space on a particular area and need to create another group of them. And rather than trying to do like logical math on like in your head, you can just create 2 groups and you can get all the numbers and balance it accordingly. And in doing that, the planner didn't properly account for when there was 2 groups to add up. It would always use the last group. So what it does now is that this would obviously add up to 50 gigawatts, and it now adds up to 50 gigawatts. And obviously if you change one of them to be 15, 17, or whatever it is, however many extra, it just calculates that, which just did not work in previous updates. It also works across different types as well, so you can have a biomass at a gigawatt. There'll be a lot of biomass burners, actually. Gigawatt, not a megawatt. Gigawatt, there'll be a lot of biomass burners at 33.33. Again, it will just add it up. Simple as that, really. Yeah, so it all works and it's all fixed. And this also shows in the statistics right at the top. So you can see here as well that this figure is the exact same one because that's the other place we're doing power. But if we add another source of power, such as in here, for example, a plutonium fuel rod at what's that, 25 gigawatts each, it'll add that up in the statistics panel accurately now as well. And that's basically it for update 4. There is a new button on the site right at the top that says changelog, where I've got a summary of all the things I've talked about today in this video for you, with various videos supporting the evidence of it as well. There are some changes that I'm not going to mention too much, because I could waffle on all day and it wouldn't make all that much sense to you. But I've noted some here. I want to go over though very quickly GameSync. Very simply, for GameSync, for those that don't know what GameSync does, because it is a fairly new feature, is that it copies the state of your factory when you press that button, and if you change anything about it, it drops out of sync. What this does is that it prompts you to go and check the factory against this planner's state. It can be improved slightly by showing you exactly what to check, but that's coming in a future update, not sure when. But at least now you're told to go and check things. So imagine if you're going from tier 4 to 5, for example, and your factories that you've got are just insufficient. So you're going around the planner, changing a load of things here, there, and everywhere. You won't know, without this feature, what to check. So at least this gives you a prompt to go off and check the factory and ensure you've got 32 oil factories of plastic, for example. Or if you've changed the plan, then 38 refineries of plastic. And it just makes your life a lot easier, and I've already got feedback from it that it's just an absolute godsend of a feature. The difference in update 4 is that it also accounts for power. So in update 3 it didn't do this, now it does in update 4. And yeah, that's GameSync. So I'd like to talk a bit about what's coming in Alpha 5. So Alpha 5 is going to be, again, another chunky update, but the main theme of Alpha 5 is going to be overclocking. Now, if you've been following the project quite a while, you'll notice that I've mentioned overclocking basically every update since update 2. This time it's actually happening. The reason why it's been delayed for so long is because we had to really nail a lot of the stability issues in update 4. But there is a more human level reason as to why it's not been done yet. we need to sit down and really think about how to graphically represent this in the planner. So I'm going to try and explain this to you now, and if you've got any ideas on how to make it better or improvements, please do reach out to Discord and have a chat with me, or on GitHub, whichever, that's fine by me, and explain your thoughts to me on how you'd fix this yourself. But I just want to demonstrate what the problem is. So, overclocking, let's address overclocking first. So say, for example, we have 39.5 factories of plastic. So one part of me is saying, okay, that to me is just 39 refineries at 100% and one of them at 50. That's fine. But what happens if in the factory you have a particular need to make, I don't know, two refineries at 50%? For example, if you've got a pipe and you want to make sure that pipe is load balanced properly, you need, and if you have multiple groups of factories, in one of my mega factories, for example, if I just show my mega plan, in my concrete mega factory, I'm using the wet concrete version of this. I've got 48 oil refineries. One pipe is not going to take 48 refineries. So you have to split them up into subgroups. So if I add 50 in this, you'll see that suddenly, if I have 4 groups of refineries, they're uneven. You would have to make them whatever 50 divided by 4 is. I'm not going to embarrass myself with the math. Which means it's a fraction. So actually, let's do the math. So 50 divided by 4, right? So you've got 12.5. So you would need 12 factories in a group and then 0.5 on one of them. How do you represent that in the UI? At the moment, very poorly. Basically, what I want to add is a tray that opens that shows and allows you to add like subgroups, which is also useful for figuring out logic on like how to split these groups up and stuff. And I might add like features of like, if you add a subgroup, it tells you how much water you need for it, which reduces a ton of math as well. But as part of that, it will be able to show you how many factories you're overclocking, how many refineries you're overclocking at what percentage, and it should also allow you to add summer sloops into that calculation as well. So you can create, I'm going to create logical groups of 50 refineries, and you can split them however which way you want, and then you can then also split them further by clock type, or clock speed, sorry, and whether it's slooped or not. So that's my vision for it. It's going to take a long time, multiple weeks probably, to make this one feature. But I feel like now the plan is in a place where it's viable to do this. And it's in a state now where I'm happy that it could sit there for a while now while I make this big update for overclocking. Another major change that needs to happen in Update 5 as well is the hidden factories view. So looking at this, it looks fairly okay. It's served its purpose pretty well. There is some usability issues with it, but it gets worse and worse and worse the bigger the factory is. So you notice here in Phase 5 intermediates, it starts to break apart. So you're importing this amount, which looks a bit strange to begin with. It chops itself off if there's too many imports. It's also inconsistent. It's not the same as exports, for example, here, where it's much differently laid out. In exports, it's actually grouping it by factory. In imports, it's not. So there's various different ways it's being applied. It's a bit of a mess, I'm not going to lie. So what I want to do is I want to really minimize everything in this and make imports, producing, and exports a button that opens a tray that shows in a list format rather than these what we call chips, which I've gone chip happy in this product, I didn't realise, where it groups it by import, by part, and by factory, and just lists them out. And it's just a dead simple, very boring, I guess, way of showing each import, produce, and exports. This should mean that the planner is actually much cleaner, because you're only opening things as and when you need to see them, whereas now you're just giving the information whether you like it or not. So in doing this, hopefully it reduces performance, improves performance, because it's not as many HTML sort of elements you need to do to render it. It improves the sanity of the user because you've not got so much information chucked at you, and it truly is acting like a collapsed factory. So this view should hopefully in update 5 be massively improved. So in update 5 we're going to make a lot of changes on how problems are represented to the user. At the moment the user kind of has to hunt for the problem. They're told here, obviously because it's massively in red, that there's a problem here, but they have to scroll down to see the problem and how to fix it. So obviously this is short of iron ingots by 50. What would be nicer is if it showed straight at the top in red why there's a problem. So for example, it would show iron ingot shortage. And if you click the button, for example, it might then spin you back down to here to then fix the problem or address it. Also, it's particularly with imports, while yes, you see a satisfy button, there's other things like this should be in red as well to denote that this is insufficient. Now, obviously, at the moment, it's just a very simple button for us to correct. However, there are other edge cases in the planner where you're able to effectively soft lock yourself. What I like to call soft locking anyway. What this means, in other people's terms, is that heavy oil residue or byproducts are not well represented in the planner currently and don't tell the user if they're going to block you. So I hope I don't explain this, but I'm going to do it for the sake of clarity. If you have a byproduct that does not get consumed, it will block the whole line because there's no demand for it. So this would be a soft lock because the planner's not telling you how to deal with this. So there's a couple of ways I want to deal with this. First of all, I want to throw up something here saying byproduct will block or something, and also in satisfaction a warning saying byproduct's going to block, and this would be an actual red problem which you need to fix or else the planner will block you. Another thing as well is syncing. So currently the planner takes a large assumption and it is specified somewhere. If you open this, it does, actually it doesn't anymore. I've removed it. It should, and you can see it's not very well represented, it should tell you that this would also itself cause a problem, there being a surplus. Reason being is it's not getting shipped anywhere, there's no demand for it. So eventually this would back up into your factory. Now, as I said, the planner takes an assumption that you'll sync these in the awesome sync. But to less experienced players, they won't know to do this. So the planner needs to tell them, hey, you've got a surplus here that isn't being shipped somewhere. This will cause a blockage. So what I might do with this is make it so that it's not a red warning, but an amber warning, and inform the user to do something about it. This kind of goes into the topic of syncing, which a number of people have tried to have a crack at. It's in here somewhere. Sync. Yeah, sync consumer options. I've tried it, failed. Another guy's tried it. It's still in progress, but I think he's dropped off it now. So it's a difficult problem to solve, but I hope to solve it in update 5 by adding the ability to simply checkbox this and mark the surplus as sunk. What this will do is it will create a awesome sync building, and it should tell you, or somewhere in the UI maybe there's a syncing section we now create saying that plates need to be sunk, plastic needs to be sunk, and heavy oil residue needs converting into packaged heavy oil residue and sinking. It's a very complex problem to solve, but maybe in the interim I'll make it just show a warning that, hey, you need to deal with this in some way, either via syncing or via exporting. And that kind of resolves the problem for now. But yeah, that's coming in update 5, hopefully. And that's pretty much everything I want to talk about in today's video. A list of all the changes that are coming in Alpha 5 can be found on this page here. In order to get access to this page, if you go on our Discord and then check important info, there's a link to SF Alpha 5 roadmap there, which gives you the list of this. If any of these are purple, like this, it means that the issue's been either actually created and finished and published live and stuff like that. We work in a rolling release kind of thing. It's not a big release thing. As soon as a feature's fixed, it just gets pushed straight to live. But yeah, if there's anything that's on this list that you think is desperately needed or tweaked, sorry, that's not on this list, then please do report it to either GitHub or Discord. Preferably GitHub, because it means I can prioritize it and stuff like that. But if you don't want to make an account, I can also do it through Discord. The way to do it on GitHub is to look on Satisfactory Factories application, or find a link in Discord, or ask me for it, and press new issue. And ideally what you should do is create a new share link. So there's this button up here, it just creates a URL that I can view your factory directly from. And if you just put it straight into the issue and give it a good title, like, I don't know, button doesn't do a thing properly, and give a description of what it should do and shouldn't do, that's all I need to understand the problem and fix it. This project is very complex. There are bugs, and if you see a bug, don't just assume I know about it. Please report it. If I have seen the bug before and I've already dealt with it, or if there's a problem with it or whatever, I will close it, or I'll say it's a duplicate of this, whatever. Feel free to just report them anyway, and it might be something I've not seen. But yeah, if you've watched this video to the very end, thank you so much. It's been a massive update, and as you can see in update 5, there's a lot more coming. So stay tuned, and I'll see you in the next one.